My career at NASA has kind of spanned a couple of decades at this point. I arrived with the class of 2000, went through the training program, primarily focused on the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station, learning those systems through the assembly process, which was a little bit like where we were with Dragon in the early days, because Space Station kept changing and you had to stay up with it. So we've definitely had to do that with Dragon as well. My first job actually inside the astronaut office was strapping crews into the space shuttle and unstrapping them when they made it back to Kennedy or to Edwards Air Force Base after a mission. And so that was a really exciting opportunity for me to, really, long before I flew on a space mission, to really operate a spaceship, which was pretty cool. After that, I was eventually assigned to a series of kind of training activities. When we had the loss of Space Shuttle Columbia, we had some uncertainty as to whether we were going to launch on Soyuz for the short term for some of our crews, so we needed people ready to go to station that way, or jump into shuttle missions. And so I went down that path and trained both as a long-duration crew member, and then flip-flopped over and flew a couple of shuttle missions, both on Endeavour to station to accomplish some assembly, so not a long-duration mission. After that, I came back and kind of worked up the leadership chain through station operations, deputy chief, and then chief of the astronaut office. So I served as the chief of the astronaut office for about 3 years, which was a pretty interesting experience. One of my goals was to try to get as many astronauts off to Kazakhstan so they would appreciate the day when we got to launch again from the Florida coast. And so I'm just super happy to be a part of launching again from the Florida coast, having done it both ways, or seen it done both ways, if you will, with the folks in Kazakhstan. It's just a proud thing as an American to see that happen again off the Florida coast and to be a part of it. My life prior to NASA was inside the regular Air Force. I worked as a flight test engineer on the F-22 program, and that's where I was at Edwards Air Force Base before I moved to Houston. Prior to that, I was at Eglin Air Force Base working in an Air Force research lab, but also primarily focused on flight test and working towards eventually test pilot school and the F-22 program before moving to Houston. In the Air Force environment, flight test environment, there's always a balance of managing risk as you go forward to execute a test point and figuring out a way to collect the data and do that in the calm, cool, collected kind of test environment with experienced folks, and make sure you've got a good vehicle or you've got a good system before a pilot or aircrew member ends up someplace a little bit more complicated with a lot less resources and has to utilize those features of an aircraft, for example. And so my role for a space mission is very much the same. I'm trying to think of all the things that could I won't necessarily say go wrong, but could make the operation we have in front of us complicated, and that you'd want to have at your fingertips so that you're ready if things did get complicated while you tried to accomplish the mission, whether it's a spacewalk or launching into space on a space shuttle, knowing what your next actions are and all the different scenarios. It's the exact same thing you need to do from a flight test perspective with an airplane or new equipment of that magnitude. It's just a very, very similar process. I think that for me, having launched a couple times on vehicles, the second time was definitely different than the first time in terms of either relaxation associated with the mission or kind of, I was a little bit about the nervousness in terms of, am I really prepared or not? There's more of an acceptance of, if you're not really prepared on launch day, you're not going to get any more prepared on launch day for launch day. You just got to accept what you got and make sure that your body is, well rested and prepared for hydrated and fed and all those good things versus trying to cram information into your head. So there's a little bit of when you're doing that for the first time, you can feel a little bit guilty of, hey, should I study one more thing, or is there one more piece of information I should get? So that's definitely different between where I was on my first flight and where I'm at right now. On my first flight, we did actually have a kind of an interesting series of failures right off the launch pad. We had a card inside of a computer someplace on the space shuttle that shook loose, and when that card shook loose, it took away some capability to fire thrusters on board the vehicle, and the signature was a little bit tricky in terms of lights that flashed and things that it showed us inside the vehicle. But the one that we hadn't trained for that was probably the most alarming was the orange light that came through all the windows at the exact same time as those messages came off of the computer screen. And so seeing all that accompanied with orange light, it's hard not to think of something a little bit less benign kind of going on that you're riding the vehicle with. And so in that moment, I do distinctly remember looking at the guy who had flown, he was on his 5th flight with me, Dom Gorey, and he was really just focused on doing what his next actions were and not letting all those things distract him. And that was a good moment for me to really focus on, hey, I better do the same thing that Dom's doing because he's done this before. And so that was an interesting experience. And it turns out that orange light was actually, you could almost say it was expected, because we launched at night and we flew through a cloud deck, and the light from the plume on the bottom of on the back of the space shuttle was reflecting through those clouds, lit them all up, and light travels faster than we do. And so it came through the windows and created that, what you could argue seemed like a confirming cue that something was amiss, but had nothing to do with the card that had shaken loose on the vehicle. So trying to dissect all of that in real time in your head is, you can get a lot of things happen like that on launching of a vehicle. Hey, we hear a sound. Okay, is that sound an expected sound? Or we see a light, is that light an expected light? What's the source of it? Does it sync up with something else that's going on or not? And Doug and I have really spent a lot of time in the SpaceX team and the NASA team thinking through these things of, hey, can we take a microphone that was on the uncrewed flight that flew before and play back the data so that we know what sounds to expect as we go through the ascent profile, or go through the tanking process, or go through a scrub process if that should happen to us, so that we know it's not orange light that's benign. If something does sound, you know what not to expect and what to expect. On launch day, we'll get up at a reasonably relaxed pace, and really we don't have more events on launch day than we have time to kind of achieve them all. And so it's really kind of designed that launch day is kind of relaxed. It doesn't get busy until you actually get into orbit, or the time comes to go strap into the vehicle, if you will. And so we do need to get up a little bit early, because there'll be a plan for exactly when we need to go to bed on orbit in order to be at the right place sleep cycle wise when we arrive at the International Space Station. So we'll get up, have a little bit of exercise probably, or breakfast and then some exercise, be able to do some last minute phone calls or reach out to folks to talk to them before we get ready to go and launch. We'll probably have lunch, and then I expect that we'll probably go down a path where we review a weather briefing of some sort to understand what our weather's going to look like across the profile that we'll fly over, or the parts of the Atlantic that we'll fly over on our way into orbit. We'll hear anything associated with the vehicle, kind of technical detail wise. We'll get a little bit of an early read on that before the formal process of getting into your flight underwear and go into your weather brief for 5 minutes quick update, go getting the suit on, and then heading out to the launch pad. Certainly when you go through the launch day preparations, there's a lot of moments that kind of stand out to you. One is the kind of the celebratory piece of it, which is that you're kind of walking out of the suit up room and getting in the vehicle that's going to take you to the launch pad. There's also a couple of moments that, once that door is closed on the vehicle that's taking you to the launch pad, you're really not going to see the wider audience again until the end of the mission. And then, of course, when you close the hatch on the launch pad, that's really when Doug and I are kind of in the vehicle, and it's our vehicle, and we need to operate it, or we're really kind of in control of the mission at that point. Certainly there are things that we can do to make it more or less successful at that point, and there'll be a ground team that's sending commands, but we're the ones that are in the vehicle at that point. Same thing happens when you get to space station. It's kind of a defining moment when you get the hatches back open, or when you close the hatch as you depart the space station. I think for me, it's been really exciting to work with SpaceX. It has a different dynamic, if you will, than maybe some of the government programs that I've been a part of before. A little bit more like when I worked in the research laboratory back in the Air Force at Eglin Air Force Base, and sometimes we'd have a university partner, or sometimes we'd have a startup company that we would be involved with that were kind of pretty agile and flexible, and had a lot of new ideas. And the challenge has been with all that newness or all that energy comes with a kind of a balancing act of, are we going to change the solution that they've come up with because it won't satisfy the mission, or are we going to let it run for a while and see where it goes, and trying to balance as to when innovation is important and when innovation isn't important, because like I said, sometimes you're focusing on, hey, we're trying to get an exploration objective accomplished, or in another case, we're really just trying to get something that works and move on from this, because a wet wipe's a wet wipe, and we need to not be designing new wet wipes for the mission in front of us. We need to innovate in the areas that there's fruit to be had, if you will, versus accepting a solution. So over the years, and it's been several years of working with SpaceX to kind of navigate that point, to see them also kind of engage on topics and figure out that, hey, this is one that we're going to let kind of be a free-for-all and we're going to innovate on, or this is one where we're going to accept a solution and we're going to move on because we have other areas that we really want to focus our resources on, really developing something completely new versus accepting a solution and kind of dividing your resources up that way. One of the things that's really different with this specific mission is that typically when we launched a space shuttle, we talked to a NASA flight director or a flight control team that had some support contractors associated with it, but was a NASA-led team on the ground. For the SpaceX mission, our primary interface is not a NASA person, not an astronaut, like it always was with the space shuttle headed into orbit. It is a SpaceX contractor that's gotten a lot of guidance and feedback and coaching, and had a lot of pointed questions and discussions with a NASA team. But fundamentally, we're a NASA crew on board this spacecraft, and we're operating it together with a flight control team that is, pretty much 100% a contractor workforce. And so that piece is very different than how we've done things in the past. And I think we've come up with a good balance with respect to that. I think when solutions have to be done quickly, you have to trust that team. When there's a lot of time, hours, potentially maybe several long minutes, for example, there are NASA people who are accessible to them in the room, or accessible to them in a more of a meeting format, kind of outside of the room, that they can reach back to try to get some feedback of working more towards the overall mission execution versus the keeping the vehicle safe, which really is a SpaceX function. Doug, Hurley, and I are about to take NASA's SpaceX Demo-2 mission to the International Space Station. During that mission, we'll perform some checkouts. Doug will get a chance to do some flying, actually, of the vehicle close to the International Space Station, for example. And we'll make sure all those systems are working for future missions that might not necessarily exercise all those different features of the vehicle. The fundamental purpose of the Demo-2 mission is to get certification for future missions from SpaceX to the International Space Station rotating crew to meet NASA's needs on board the space station. The SpaceX vehicle has a lot of features and capabilities that hopefully we never have to utilize in a real mission, but Doug and I will make sure that they are all ready just in case we do. And it's everything from a response to a fire on board to flying close to the International Space Station manually instead of letting the computer do it. We'll make sure all those systems are working during the test flight so that the future missions will have them available even if they don't plan to utilize them. Absolutely. We've got a lot of objectives on board the vehicle that we need to accomplish to really make sure that it's good to go. We'll do everything from actually talk from the Dragon vehicle to a Russian Soyuz once we get close or dock to the International Space Station, just to make sure that comm system was working if you ever needed it during an emergency. We'll take the spacesuits on and off in a couple of different situations to make sure that we have good data for how long that takes if you had to do it from an emergency response perspective. We'll dig out all kinds of hardware that's stowed in the nooks and crannies of the vehicle so that we have a good feel for how things are in place and getting them back in place prior to entry. And so we plan to do all those things as just a part of our test mission. So missions in the future can focus on the real mission, which is getting trained crews to the International Space Station. You know, as we get closer and closer to the launch date, we've had to balance a lot of things. We've had to accept kind of the status of the vehicle and then understand how we're going to operate it. And I think really both Doug and I's focus is making sure that we're proficient for whatever launch dates come. We've had the launch date kind of slip a little bit to this point, and so we're really chasing the final preparations to make sure that we're on time and on target for the launch date right now, which is in late May. You know, there are parts of it of the mission that are discovery, and there are parts of it that aren't, right? And so you just want to know which parts are in the discovery portion of things, which part is exploration, and which part in our case, we're providing a vehicle to future crews. And so our intent is to make that vehicle predictable and figure out everything so that we can come back and tell them, so that the vehicle itself is predictable, even though the mission itself might not be, right? So maybe it's a complicated way to describe it, but you want Dragon's vehicle response to be predictable so that when we can use that to discover things with the International Space Station. Our intent is to not try to explore the Mach envelope for a capsule coming through the atmosphere necessarily, and see whether or not that was a limit that human-wise we could tolerate or we couldn't tolerate, sort of a thing. Our intent is to provide this vehicle to enable the real exploration mission, which in this case is keeping the space station operating, keeping the scientific discoveries, even the human piece of that with crew members on orbit for extended duration, keep that data continuing to come. That's what we're providing with this vehicle. Our goal is to not necessarily have every aspect of the vehicle's performance be an exploration objective, because we're focused on a different real exploration objective with the International Space Station. I think that the mission that we have in front of us and the success that we're going to have is a representation of America. Bringing it back to the Florida coast is a really cool thing to see how many people from across the country have to pull together to pull something like this off. It's just it's inspiring to me, and I'm just excited to be a part of it. One of the things that's been really interesting, I think, both for Doug and I, is having been through a lot of training flows, whether it was associated with an aircraft back in our military days, our regular military days, or inside of NASA's program with space shuttle training or space station training, or our familiarity with the Soyuz. we've kind of seen mature kind of training programs brought to us. And so it's been really exciting to see the SpaceX folks kind of go through that process as we've worked towards Demo-2 to both develop training and at the same time develop a vehicle. And so, you can kind of see, hey, the training is going to roughly look like this in the end. And so we've got to definitely face that balance of, do you want to accept an operational challenge or a complicated interface and then just deal with it with a bunch of training, or try to fix those things up front that says, hey, if we just made this consistent across all the displays, the training would be much easier. And so we try to strike that balance. I think one of the ways to describe it for both Doug and I is that we're hopeful that future crews on Dragon vehicles headed to NASA space stations aren't cursing our names because we accepted some feature that was complicated and hard to train, and in the end hard to operate. That they're like, yeah, I can't understand. I don't even remember why that's so easy, but it is so easy, and so that they forget about us because they don't have anything to curse our names over. The mission training for the Dragon vehicle, and particularly the NASA mission to space station, is very different from a shuttle mission in that we've had to develop the training as we've kind of moved forward. It's also different because of how much more automated capability there is on board the Dragon vehicle, and so our role gets to be a little bit bigger picture where we can step back and really understand, is the mission progressing correctly, rather than really focus on the really minute details of managing a heater temperature or something along those lines that astronauts need to be good at in some situations, but having too many of those responsibilities during something dynamic like launching into space is undesirable, to say the least. And shuttle had a lot of things like that, where you had to have somebody to just watch over the vehicle to make sure it was doing what it was supposed to do, and took away from being able to see the big picture like we're able to do with Dragon. As we kind of go through the development of the vehicle and the training process, I would say there's probably two things that jump out to me as kind of big wins from a NASA perspective as we move forward. One is associated with having a high enough fidelity from a training perspective that we can, both Doug and I can sit in a capsule, we can put on suits, and we can go through a situation or a scenario where the suits are going to inflate to try to protect us from whatever situation is developing on board the vehicle. And getting that level of fidelity of training hardware versus PowerPoints and virtual presentations of it is really important from an operator's perspective. So that's a huge win, and the SpaceX team stepped up to that, and we really appreciate it. I think another piece of it is kind of coming up with a concept of how, for a highly automated vehicle, you don't lose sight of kind of the need for the crew to always have a safe path home. You don't necessarily have to save the mission with the crew, but you need to save the crew with the crew, is kind of the mindset that we've put out there. And so I feel really good about kind of across the spectrum of the whole mission, from pre-launch to launch to time on orbit, close to space station, all the way to splashdown, that we have a path out, or a path to take care of the crew if we needed to, if things got complicated. So that's a big win for us. There's absolutely moments associated with that. I think one of our biggest accomplishments was a tool to be able to plan our own way out of orbit back to Earth. And we had to come up with a way that didn't break the software allocation that was out there, and kind of fit into what SpaceX's model was to the experiences that we've had with Space Shuttle or Soyuz, where the crew typically does have that capability, and figuring out how to add it to a vehicle that's most of the way there, and take advantage of the way that vehicle operates versus trying to force a shuttle or a Soyuz solution on it was really important. And when we got over that hump, and we got the aha moment, I would really say, by the SpaceX team, to be able to read back that that it wasn't the idea of you had to prove to them that this scenario existed. We just had the big picture of, okay, how does the crew just get home if they end up in this situation? How does the crew get home if they end up in this situation? When they were able to flip that switch and not count how many failures it took to get there, but accept that let's figure out the easiest way to provide that capability, and they got on board with it. That was the aha moment, was helping them understand that that was something that was going to be important to crews on board. I think one of the biggest challenges kind of going through this process was trying to find the sweet spot for when the contracting team or the engineers that we were working with were ready to address the specific concerns that were out there. And so I think that in general, we've found a place where the SpaceX team is able to kind of support us, or the NASA team's able to support them in supporting us as we work through it. But finding out when that sweet time was is a challenge. And as you lay out a program that, building a spacecraft is not something that we haven't successfully done it in short time periods. And so figuring out the right window to, hey, this is the month where we need to push this specific issue hard because they've broken into the software code and they're editing it right now. And if we add the capability to just put a timer delay or for this feature in place, that we can solve this other big picture problem of giving the crew some capability, finding those sweet spots so that it's not like that we need the administrator's help in order to make a change to the vehicle. That's not where you want to be. You want to find those sweet spots and do that process efficiently. And so they're just too numerous to mention in terms of item by item that, hey, we found August of 2018 was the right time for this one, or 2015, October was the right time for this one. We had just a lot of those when you had the right people at the right place at the right time, and you could get the feature in place without kind of crushing the resource bank or calling in the big guns in order to force a solution. I think there's a lot of kind of this space flight idea that there's romance and surprise, and you're running through the mission and you're doing it by the seat of your pants. And I think there was a time in flight test that was true, that we really trusted people with good instincts and threw them into those situations, and they weren't necessarily as prepared as they could have been. I think we really do focus on trying to make space flight in a lot of these situations, particularly for a test mission, to kind of go off as expected, to really focus on what do I expect to hear at this point. And the best analogy that I've been able to share with people is that I really do, if folks have seen that older movie called Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray's walking through his day, and he's done that day so many times that he knows, when to catch the boy who falls out of the tree, or when to not step in the puddle of water. And so, because those things have all happened to him before, our intent is to go through this mission and not find surprises, because we've prepared ourselves. Because surprise for us is just an opportunity to not help the greater team be successful if we responded in an appropriate way when we got surprised. I think that what's really interesting about this, I think folks sometimes think of it as to, hey, we've passed this capability off to them and they just took it over. I view it a little bit differently. I view it more in terms of how does NASA push its experience to a wider group of people. And so, NASA has a lot of experience operating spacecraft in some very specific environments. One of the things that we're not always good at is figuring out the best way to share that and provide that capability, nurture it in another organization. And so I think that the SpaceX team, were they ready to launch humans 5 years ago when, we were really tasked with working with them on a day-to-day basis from a crew perspective? The answer is no. But through years of the NASA team helping to share that experience and asking them the questions that or teaching them the lessons that we've learned by going through this, I think we've nurtured and shared our experience base to kind of allow them to, now there's another capability in the U.S. besides NASA to operate something of this magnitude. And so that's the part that I'm most proud of. I don't view this as, hey, we just gave this away or asked somebody else to do it for us. It was hand in hand trying to, hey, how do we pass lessons on? What can we teach, or what can we learn from them? And figuring out the best way to do that. That's just been really exciting from my perspective. You know, from an analogy perspective in terms of how we're operating, it's been interesting for both Doug and I think, as we've gone forward, having come from military test programs where the Air Force or the Marine Corps did not build an airplane. You know, you didn't have those services with their own engineers that were figuring out how to build it and operate it. We relied on the infrastructure that was in the U.S. I flew with Boeing pilots and Lockheed pilots as a part of the F-22 program, and so that was just something that we did, and as we worked together to build a vehicle. And so certainly the aviation industry, there was maybe the mission requirement came from the government side in terms of, you know, providing for the military or providing a specific capability for the U.S. as a whole. But the corporate infrastructure provided that capability, and we had a healthy banter to try to get the capability and make sure we were communicating as to what we wanted produced in the end. And we're doing that now with the space program, which is really exciting from my perspective. I think if you don't go down this path of continuing to try to expand the group of people with the capability to launch humans, or the capability of making a vehicle with the types of redundancy and meets the expectations of, you know, how you want to take care of a crew inside of a vehicle based on the lessons that either the NASA team or the government team has worked. If you're not sharing that knowledge base and continuing to grow it, you'll stay stovepipe and stifled, and so you won't continue to expand as a spacefaring nation. And so by sharing this experience with SpaceX and creating another partner that has this same capability, I think we really set the future up to continue to blossom versus to stay, you know, stovepiped. And so it was really critical to go down this path. And I think as we go forward, there'll be more and more activities that you know, we have to figure out from a government perspective how we nurture the environment, which is that corporate support, or how to get that capability internalized in those organizations so that we can do things together versus, you know, just have one group with the capability. I think as we look at this mission, you know, when is the last time humans launched on a new vehicle, launching into space? Certainly on the American side, it's been several decades to get to a new vehicle again. And so I think we'll look back on this as a kind of a new era in space exploration. When I came into the astronaut office, we had a space shuttle, and we worked towards retiring that over the first decade of my career at NASA. Now we're in a time when we've got multiple vehicles under development, all flying, whether it's weeks or in a few short years, really close together. So it's a great time to be in the astronaut office. It's a great time from a space exploration time frame just to see all that happening, and it's because of this nurturing of the environment, of a wide, being able to pull in a wider group of people who can contribute towards human spaceflight. It's a super cool time. You know, from a mission perspective, I think the things that are most exciting to me about it, having been in the astronaut office and seen shuttle launches and seen the crowds on the Florida coast, and having grown up with watching the shuttle program, and you know, kind of being a child that was inspired by the missions that were in front of NASA. And it wasn't just human spaceflight, and it was a Voyager program or otherwise other programs that NASA had that excited me. I think it's important for the U.S. to continue to have these exciting things out there from a technical, engineering, science challenge perspective, because it motivated me to go into this sort of a career, and I know that it motivates other children having seen them, having done interviews or discussions with school kids around the country. It's definitely something that they can all relate to and have an interest in. And so I'm excited to bring it back to the Florida coast, or be a part of bringing it back. I'm just one piece of a, multi-thousand member team that's going to hopefully pull this off in short order, and I'm really excited to be a part of that. I think on a deeply personal level, I'm really excited that my son is going to get a chance to see me launch into space. Being an astronaut has been a little bit of an abstraction thing for him, because he's seen me do it in old videos, but he hasn't seen me do it for real. And so I'm excited for him to see this launch. He wasn't born hadn't been born yet when I flew previously, so I'm excited for that. It's been really interesting, I think, for both my wife and I to have gone through the process of seeing each other launch in space. That's an aspect of our relationship, I think, that most couples can't share, because I've seen her take that risk and had it be in front of her, and I've done that to her. And there's just something different about watching a rocket launch when there are people on board. You feel a little bit differently about the pit of your stomach, and it just is a different type of excitement when there's humans on board. And I can only tell you it's multiplied significantly when it's somebody that you know, and then somebody, of course, that's a family member. It's in love, that it's even multiplied more. And so I think that that's something that we share between the two of us, and I think that another kind of unique aspect, I think that this probably wouldn't work for all couples, but it does work for us, is that from a work perspective, we have a very intimate understanding of each other's roles, if you will, in their day job versus what you do with the rest of your life. And so I think that makes a big difference, where, hey, I'm headed off to Los Angeles again to work with the team out at SpaceX to be prepared for this mission. She recognized why that's important, and not and what I might be doing out there versus that it's not another vacation to Los Angeles for the week that I got a chance to go on. And so there's an appreciation for the work that's involved with what we do that I think, without a partner that has that same appreciation, I think it can be challenging for some folks to really understand the stress or the criticality of what might seem more mundane, or might be, just looks like an opportunity for excitement. It looks pretty cool to walk out of the ONC building in a SpaceX suit and go get ready for NASA's mission to the International Space Station. But there's a lot of work and a lot of time that takes away from family that that my spouse appreciates, and I love her for that. I think I probably have a couple of groups of folks that I really think should be recognized for the historic event that's in front of us, and bringing us home safely, of course, at the end of our journey to the International Space Station. First of all, I want to thank the Commercial Crew Program wider team, and that's both NASA and SpaceX, and it's the Boeing team as well. It's the entire Commercial Crew Program team that's worked together to get to this point where we've got vehicles that are going to be on the launch pad here in just a few short days, ready to head to the International Space Station. It's been a journey. We've done it together, and I think we've done it cooperatively, and I'm really proud of that. So I want to say thank you to that entire team, whether they're here in Houston, they're on East or the West Coast, or all over the country. It's just been awesome to see what you guys have been able to pull off. For the American public, we, as that entire team, we're doing this because we think it's important for our nation, and we're proud for this opportunity that you've given us to try to pull this off for us as Americans. And so thank you for that, and I hope you enjoy the opportunity to see human spaceflight again from the Florida coast. I know I'm going to be excited when we do it again.